for a 9 a.m. start. I know that's not always exactly how we roll. I told Rabbi Sonja, yeah, folks will be trickling in till probably 10 after. It's all good. Look at you with the fan club. This is my friend, Rabbi Sonja Pilz. She serves as the rabbi of Congregation Beth Shalom here in Bozeman. Those of you, Mark Kulo was the rabbi before Sonja, but that was also during COVID, and so we didn't get a chance to know him as well as we got to know Rabbi Ed Staffman, who also serves Beth Shalom and is now, his official title is Rabbi Emeritus, I believe. Yep. So Sonja, I'm not going to do a whole ton by way of introduction, except to say that I really appreciate you being here. Sonja's got a fantastic history and education and having lived in lots of places. And so we'll share a bit and then we'll open up for some questions and conversation. So let's pray. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Oh God, thank you for the gift of a new day, for the shining sun, for the opportunity to gather. Be with us as we hear from Rabbi Sonja. Open our hearts to hear her word to us. Help us engage in good conversation. We pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. Rabbi Sonja, everybody.
Thank you. So now that you hear me talk, you understand why there's a microphone today. I don't do anything without it. So first of all, thank you for having me. I know it took some bravery on my end to step into this conversation, and I can only assume that it will take some bravery from you too. Here are the rules. I want you to say what you really think. You don't need to soft-spoil it or smoothen it or whatever you think you need to do. Just tell me what you think. Other than that, the plan is such. I'm going to talk. I hope I will only talk for like maybe 20 minutes. And part of it will be autobiographical, so it will not be too boring. And then I'm going to end on maybe a few abstract-ish remarks. And then I'm going to just hand the mic to you. Because the main reason that I'm here is that about 3 weeks ago I talked to a friend of mine in Israel and he said, what do I do? What am I supposed to do? And he just said, talk. The more you talk and the more you are in conversation, the better. So this is one conversation. And it is really important to me that it is going to be a conversation. So, to give you a little background about who is standing here in front of you, I wanted to tell you about 3 and a bit years of my life that I spent in Jerusalem. And they're all done quite a long time ago. That was due to first immigration and then the cost of flying and then COVID and now we're 4 and the cost of life, frankly. But hopefully there will be more time in Jerusalem. But the years that I'm going to tell you about were all in my 20s. And the first one happened right after I finished high school. That was in 2004. 2004 to 2005 was the first year that I lived in Jerusalem. For those of you who are not intimately familiar with the chronology of catastrophes in the Middle East, that is just about 1 year after the end of the Second Intifada. So I lived in a city where I had to travel a lot by bus, because frankly, that's how everyone goes around, it gets around in Jerusalem. And I was still living in a time where people could tell me, maybe beware of the bus number 18. That one blew up a lot. So I had to take bus number 18 quite a lot because while I was working in the morning with kids with disability from all over Jerusalem and its surroundings, in the afternoon I was visiting Holocaust survivors all over town at their homes. So I was on the bus every day for hours. And what I learned in this time is that the Second Intifada seemed to be over. Because the year that I was there was the first year in Jerusalem where no buses blew up. But I also learned something about the feeling of sitting on a bus every day and looking who is getting on the bus. And sometimes having very strange ideas about like, maybe I should sit at the back of the bus. And then one day realizing that that wouldn't help me at all to sit at the back of the bus. And the only thing that will help me is to live my life as good as I can and to look at everybody who's entering the bus with open and kind eyes. Because that was the right way, frankly, to live, not only to ride the bus number 18. Over this year in Jerusalem, the buses seem to be also the least of our problems. Because another thing happened in this year. And that is the 2004-2005 was the year when Ariel Sharon prepared what is, I have no idea actually what it's called in English, but in Hebrew it's called Hitnachut. And I'm pretty sure that in English it's called expulsion from Gaza. Is that what you called it? So until 2004, the fall of 2004, the spring of 2005, in Gaza there were 12 Israeli settlements. Those were mostly farms for citrus fruits, for tomatoes, for peppers, for avocados. And at the end of this year, all those Israeli settlers were taken out of Gaza by the Israeli army. That was, as much as we understood it back then, it was a very strategic move by a politician who wasn't famous for being particularly left-wing, to give the Palestinians something and buy peace. So the city that I lived in during this year was very divided. Everyone who was against the Hitler had little orange ribbons tied to their cars. And everyone who was for the Hitler had little blue ribbons tied to their cars. And people would literally get into traffic accidents and yelling scenes in the middle of the road over whether this was the right or the worst thing to do. And some of it had to do with the land. But most of those conflicts had to do with what this would mean for the future. And then Israel pulled out, and some years later I would live with one of the soldiers who had pulled the settlers out, and he still had no regrets about doing that. It was a roommate, by the way, just in case you got some different ideas. It was a roommate. And I left. I left and I went back home and I started studying. And like many, many young folks who live for a year in the Middle East, I studied with a major of Judaic studies and 2 minors of Islamic studies and psychology. So you fast forward 3 years. I came back in 2008. This year I was a student. I didn't live in the city. I lived on what we call the French Hill. I lived right at the campus of Hebrew University, which is a little on one of the hills outside of the city borders of Jerusalem, much like some universities are here in the United States. It is, frankly speaking, East Jerusalem, which caused me a little bit of interpretation, but this is where I studied, so I moved up there on French Hill, which is a lovely little, like a little suburb of Jerusalem. And I studied there 1 year, Middle Eastern Studies and Talmud. It was fun. It was 2008. And I studied Arabic, and I studied Middle Eastern history, and I studied decolonizing studies. And I had lovely professors from everywhere, Palestinians, Egyptians, Germans, Israelis. It was 2008. And all we talked about was Napoleon and his invasion of Egypt, the westernization of the map of the Middle East, colonial powers, the division of the maps, the wars between Egypt and Israel. Also some about the Arabs living in Israel and the West Bank, but you know what we didn't talk about at all was Gaza. Never mentioned it. It played no role in our heads. And in hindsight, this is really interesting for me, because this wasn't only us at the university. This was all of Israel. A year before, in 2007, Hamas had officially taken over Gaza Strip. But Hamas was something like a more religious part of Palestinian identity. They had actually built some hospitals and schools. Fatah did very nice things, but sometimes they did very nice things only for a handful of people. And I think sometimes that's true maybe until today. But so it seemed like actually the status quo in 2008 wasn't the worst. There were two Palestinian territories. One was called the West Bank. No one would go there anymore in 2008. But we had been going just a couple of years before. We saw that it was more or less looking like Israel, just a little more loud, which is hard to imagine that's possible, but it was. And then there was a place where we didn't go anymore, and that was Gaza. But it seemed like things were going well. It seemed like everybody was ruled by the people they had democratically elected. And so I spent a year about intellectual debates on the history and possibly the future. And after a year, that year was very, very impactful for me personally. I left again. I came back only 2 years later. Now it was 2011. In 2011, I spent a year as a rabbinical school in Jerusalem. And this year was very different. Because this year, for the very first time, I had to train how to go into a bomb shelter on a regular basis. Because what was different between 2008 and 2011 was that Hamas had managed to acquire enough material, enough money, and strategies to start launching missiles into Israel. No one talked anymore about buses. No one talked yet about trucks or knives or all the other things. But now we were training how to quickly as possible run from a classroom down into the bunker. And with the mentality of many of my Israeli teachers, we just continued studying. We were sitting there studying, and then I would go home and I would call some friends just to make sure that I wouldn't lose my sense of reality, to process what had just happened to me, because I kept on thinking nothing in my life had prepared me for this. And then I left, and only a couple of years later the knives started, and I don't know if you remember this. So let me take a break from the personal narrative, because I do want to say a couple of things, as I said, in a more abstract way. My experiences that I had in those years are pretty similar to the experiences of many, 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 many Israelis. Life is fine, unless it's not, and then you adapt, and then you kind of wiggle on. Hello. And I would almost dare to say that this hopefully is also true for many Palestinians. Life was doable, maybe not perfect, but doable for the time being. For Palestinians living in the West Bank, very little has changed in the last years. Abbas has brought great stability. For the Palestinians living in Gaza, a lot has changed over the last years. And I think one terrible mistake that all of Israel made was not to realize and not to want to know how terrible, terrible, terrible the situation in Gaza had become. Under how much pressure people were living, with how much hatred people were living. And so it happened that a country where everyone was always living in a sense, at least in 67, that they're absolutely invincible and absolutely safe, was so utterly unprepared and is now so shell-shocked to its core about the facts that they could be surprised, how vulnerable they were, and that it is now more than a month, and we still haven't brought any hostages home, at least not by anything that we have done. I think all of those three things are absolutely difficult to process for the majority of Israelis. So well, two more things I wanted to say, because I think two things might be most pressing in this space here. One of my congregants said to me, Rabbi, what do I say? A lot of people talk to me about genocide. And I thought a little bit about this. I read many, many years ago, I read a book by an Israeli historian. His name is Ilan Pape, who was from Haifa. I think now he lives in Berlin, I think. He published a book that was called The Ethnical Cleansing of Palestine. It was, of course, a bestseller. No, it wasn't. It was really hotly debated, and people really grappled with the fact that he had used this term. What he was writing about was the War of 48. And this is really important to understand. The War of 48 was fought mainly by former European Jews. And I don't need to explain this to you. They came with lots of European ideologies. They came with a lot of traumatizing personal experiences. They came, and I really think so, truly believing that it was time for them to come home. And they ran into difficulties. And they were great political strategists. But one thing, I think, they really didn't do well. And that is that they fought the war as if the world would end in 52. They didn't think about long-term, sustainable solutions that would have made peace possible. They just left it there. Once they had enough land, they left it there, and they hoped for the best. I truly believe that a lot of them secretly or not so secretly hoped that Palestinians would just magically disappear. They would pack their suitcases and they would go to Syria or Egypt or Jordan or maybe England or the United States of America, where life would be nicer for them. What they didn't expect at all, I think, is that the rest of the Arabic world really didn't want these Palestinians, and they did not welcome them. So while a lot of wealthy and educated Palestinians made it out of there, and they do live now in France and England and the United States of America, most of them got stuck. And today, and I do want to say this, there are about 10 million Palestinians. That is much more than there were in 48. So I said to my congregant, look, genocide is not the right word. Were they treated fairly? Absolutely not. If you want to use another atrocious word, you can use apartheid. You can talk about that. Because there are some parallels there. But to use the word genocide is not the right word. And I think I want to stop here. I hope that by saying the G word, you're now going to feel free to say whatever else you have in your mind. But I just want to be clear, please talk to me.
Thank you for being here. It's very important for us to have this conversation with you. And thank you for being so honest about the circumstances. And thank you for mentioning the word genocide, but not focusing on genocide. And thank you for telling us more about what's happened in Gaza over the generations since 1948. My question of you is, 4,500 children have died now in Gaza on account of this recent circumstance. I would fully say Israel must defend itself. Absolutely. No question. But why in the world has Israel taken it so far now that there's been so much killing and so much desecration, so much hardship, so much sadness on both sides? It seems to me that, one more thing to say. I actually hear from, we're the ELCA. We have ELCA congregations in Gaza, in Palestine, I should say, in Israel. And I'm a friend of the bishop in Jordan, whose name is Moran. he feeds me all kinds of information. And that is something important for me to hear and for us to hear. We are the ELCA. There is the ELCA in Palestine, and there is the ELCA in Jordan. Jews live by the Torah. Totally respect. We are parallel to the Jewish faith in our understanding of what it means to be a follower of Christ. And to do that is to be one that lets go of oneself and forsakes oneself and gives up oneself so that our concern is for the other. The same for the people of the Torah. You are not going to answer this question. I can't answer this question. But it has to. It has to end.
I see that we have some teenagers in the room, especially I see like a little mister here. Maybe you want to step out for a second. Thank you. Just, I leave it to you. I'm going to say some things that I know if that would be my child, I would send it back. Thank you. Okay, so, the question, and thank you for that, right? The question was, what about the numbers? The numbers of death, especially the numbers of deaths of children, occurring every day, increasing every day in Gaza. So, and how do we think about this religiously? I think that was the second part of your question. Maybe specifically as Christians, but also as Jews. I want to tell you that, and this might sound very banal, we do have the same book, right? We call it the Torah, we call it the Bible. A lot of the books overlap. Some actually are diverging a little, but that's more editorial questions than the actual content. We don't read it the same way. And I have come to realize this over and over again, and this is often a source of real joy for me. Sitting with people realizing that, oh, we're reading the same text, but it really sounds differently coming from your mouth than it comes from mine. One of the things that are crucial to understand what makes the Jewish religious identity is the fact that the Torah is also not only these books. The Torah is a lot more than this. It's century, it's 2 millennia of rabbinic thinking. And one of the things that is central to rabbinic thinking is what we call the corpus of mitzvot, a mitzvah, the guidelines how to live our lives. And one of these mitzvot is to return captives. And I'm not saying this lightheartedly. My background is very European. All throughout European history, Jews have been captured from their villages and held hostages, tortured, murdered in all the ways to get something from the Jewish community. Sometimes it was basically just to move away. Sometimes it was money, sometimes it was economic advantages, whatever it was. But there was a practice to captivate Jews. And sometimes they were just sold away into slavery somewhere else. And let's leave it like that. So bringing people home, even if it's just one person, not to stop at any moment because it would be too expensive or it would cost too many lives, is a huge, huge religious commandment for us. And we're all very, very, very aware of this. We do not let a single person behind. Never. I've also told you a lot about the nature of those captivations because I want to explain to you that the things that happened on October 7th, and for some reason the Western press and media are very tame about reporting what actually happened there, they're not just captivations. I hope, in all honesty, I don't know, because I'm not a military strategist. But my hope is that if more than 200 Israelis would be imprisoned in Gaza, and we could see them, and there would be interviews, and we would know that they have water and food and sanitary structures, and that they get their medications. Would there be outrage? Absolutely. Yes, because there are 150 kids. That's not the right number, hold on. I forgot the number. I think it's 45, something like this. 45. So there are kids. But I'm very sure if we would know where they are and we would be able to see them and talk to them, there would be negotiations. And there might be a prisoner exchange today. The problem with what happened is that we saw the corpses. And these corpses were not people who were shot. These people were gunned down. These people were gang raped. These people were burnt in ovens while the rest of the family had to watch. These people were tied together. There are people who were found like this, with lots of bullets in their hands because they tried to protect their faces from not one bullet, but dozens. For the Israeli society, seeing these things, and they're much more present than they are in the U.S. Everyone in Israel knows what happened to the people who were captured. Everyone knows about them. Everyone knows about the broken pelvis. Everyone knows about the families shot all together in their bed. Everyone's seen these pictures. These pictures, in combination with the religious commandment to free each captive, make it so that Israel will not stop. And it's a terrifying truth. And you know what? We all knew this. When I woke up on October 7th and I started reading the news, I cried. Because it is very clear to everyone who understands something about Israel, Israeli history, Palestinian history. You know, I have a friend of mine who said, this will cost us hundreds of thousands of lives. And I said, well, I hope not. I hope it will only be 10,000s. And this was not a cynical conversation. This was a heartbreaking conversation. And I do want to say this out loud, and I'm okay if you don't agree with me. The situations of Gazans in the last decades was hell. And I feel so sorry. Because I wish this would have been more present, and I wish I had done more about it, and I wish anyone would have known what to do, which is a bigger problem, because we really don't know what to do. But it is not going to happen. There will be no ceasefire until we either know that they're all dead, or that we're bringing them home. But Israel doesn't have any wiggle room in between. And I do want to say that one of the most moving stories of the last month was, and I don't know who that was, I think it was the head of the Coptic church in Jerusalem. Maybe you all know this better than I did, but the head of some church had officially addressed the Hamas and said, you take me and you let them go. And this was incredible. And I wish they had said yes to this. And of course they didn't. Because they very much knew that it would change the situation dramatically. Also for the Israeli side. There's no easy way out of this. I can assure you that 100% of the Israeli society, what they want is to get them home. No one wanted to launch this war. This war makes us look bad. It turns the world against us. We lose so much of the hopes we have for the futures just every day. There were peace negotiations. between Israel and some Arabic countries that were not even, they were not in conversations for the last decades. This looked so nice, except for those missiles every now and then. But it really looked so nice for Israelis. And we completely missed what an utter hell it was on the other side. So, my hope is that this will stop today. My hope is that they will bring them home and the bombing will stop. But the truth is that even if this happens and the bombing will stop and the hostages will be home, it is not clear to me what will happen next. Because I think this big hope that I described from 2005, that Israel will pull out of Gaza, and then maybe Egypt will open the border, and then Gaza will just become a normal country, maybe part of the Palestinian Authority or not. I don't think we can believe this anymore. We don't believe it anymore because Egypt hasn't opened the borders. And it's also really hard to say, we're just going to leave you alone. Do your thing. Well, we do not know whether you're digging more tunnels, whether we do not know what else is happening now. So I'm really at a loss. And I think this is really important to realize. Most people have no idea what to do, including the Israeli government, and including all of Israel. They really don't know what to do. They're not operating right now with a smart vision in mind for the future. Which I hate to say, I wish it was so. They don't. They're reacting, they're overly emotional, all these bad things. I truly believe that looking at Israel and where it is at this point, Israel will not be able to do this alone. So I am very, very happy about the very hands-on involvement of the US. I'm very semi-happy about the semi-hands-on involvement of the EU. And I'm hoping very much that the Arabic League will get it together, maybe for the first time in history, and also put some solutions on the table and a willingness to work with Israel and the Palestinian Authority to make them reality. Because it is delusional to believe that even if the bombing will stop and the hostages return home, that we could just go back to where it was before. We cannot. And so, because I don't believe that this wisdom will come from Zion, I really hope it will come from somewhere else. That's my only hope left, to be honest, is the international community.
What was the feeling about the Christians that were in Gaza? Were they even in your conscience?
Yes, so it's interesting.
And those churches that are being destroyed?
Yeah. So, when I was there, especially in the year 4 and 5, the borders to Gaza were already closing. So I had one roommate who visited there about a month before the expulsion, and they looked, and what they saw was a country with a lot of potential. It wasn't a religious trip. So to the best of my knowledge, the Christian population of Gaza has shrunk dramatically over the last decades. Because frankly, Hamas has not made Gaza Strip a nice place for Christians to live. So it's now less than 1%. That is not true at all for the Christian population in the West Bank, of which there is a much more significant number, some of whom I've been friends with. So if you go on a religious tour to Israel and you travel sites like because I never talk about this in English, but the church in Bethlehem, I think it's called the Native.
Church of the Nativity.
Church of the Nativity, yes. Not beautiful, I have to say, but impressive. Very big. But somewhat brutalist in architecture. This church is huge and it attracts a lot of tourists every year. You will go into Jerusalem and you will go go up to the north to see the Lake of Galilee. Those 3 stations are all accessible to tourists and accessible to Palestinian Christians all throughout the country. What is really important to know for you is that someone with an Israeli passport loses their health insurance the moment they step into the West Bank. It's a somewhat subversive little detail that keeps a lot of Israelis from ever going there, but that's not true for the other way around. A lot of Palestinians cross the border every day into Israel and back, mainly for work. I'm the last person, which is why I said we can talk about apartheid, I'm the last person who will tell you that chances of an average Israeli living in Israel and an average Palestinian living in the West Bank to have a normal, comfortable, safe life are the same. They're not. There's massive differences. And it makes me sad and ashamed to think about that. I do want to tell you one other thing, is that for a Christian Palestinian living inside of Israel with an Israeli passport, your life is more or less the same. And I can really say this, used to be until a month ago, as your Israeli Jewish neighbor. You didn't need to go to the army, but you could as a Christian. But you have full access to Israeli education, which is fabulous. It costs a fraction of what it costs here in this country. You were free to travel. You were free to have friends. I do remember one scene in 2010 when the missiles were flying on Jerusalem and everybody was very mellow. And I was wondering, oh my gosh, how do all these Palestinian Jerusalemites feel? Are they afraid that there will be hostilities against them? Are they afraid that they will be blamed for the missiles flying in from Gaza? So I was walking home on my way from the yeshiva, and I came by Cafe Oma, which was one of the few ones that were still open, and I peeked inside and wanted to see what was going on, and you know what? Everybody in there spoke Arabic. Because it was all Arabs. They had gone out for coffee. So they were not worried, and they did feel safe. This is much less true now, because there is a wave of violence also inside of Israel. People blame everyone, whatever not, similar to here in Europe. There are protests, there is violence. Things seem so fragile now. But at least for a long, long time, there was something like a Palestinian Israeli who felt safe and seen and equal within the state of Israel. Not happy, not satisfied, and complaining, and rightfully so, but some things that still need to be done. But safe and healthy and accepted. So I know I'm not really addressing the question about Christians. To me, it really doesn't matter if a Palestinian is Christian or Muslim. And I know this might sound quite strange to you, but it really has no meaning to me. They're not Jewish and they lived in Israel, and as long as they were citizens, they had the same rights and duties as everybody else, except serving in the army. For the Christians in the West Bank, I know life has been harder, I would say, but it was possible. For the Christians in Gaza, I know life was very, very, very difficult. But that had nothing to do with the occupation, or whatever you want to frame the status of Gaza was in the last decades. And what I'm very sure is that right now churches are getting destroyed. They're not getting destroyed because they're churches. I'm really sure of that. I don't think that we're right now in a place where Israel would target Christian buildings or people for any specific reason. I'm just going to repeat the question. Is in the Torah anything that says that in the land of Israel there should only live Jews? No. For many different reasons, right? The Torah doesn't speak about the land of Israel. The Torah doesn't speak about the state of Israel. The Torah talks about the land of Israel. The Torah doesn't talk about the Jews because it doesn't know that concept yet. It talks about Abraham and Abraham's family. And the Torah doesn't necessarily talk about nationalism and identities the way we think about them now. And the Torah mainly addresses nomadic structures, in which it's very easy to imagine that a people move through and another people move through, and some things like ownership and property lines never really get discussed. So no, I don't think the Torah is any helpful in talking about who owns the land today. There's a couple more things that I want to say, because I realized another word that I could have dropped here was decolonialization. And I don't know to what degree this is important for you right now, but it is important for a lot of people who are protesting right now, the existence of the state of Israel as is. Not whether or not there also live Christians, and there also live Muslims, and there also live Druze, and there also live Buddhists. All of this has been true and was not debated in the last decades for the state of Israel. The state of Israel is, while it is definitely Jewish, and it is not always welcoming, and in the last years has been less and less and less welcoming to diversity. It at least used to be a state in which people of all kinds of religions could live together. But one thing that I do want to say is, Israel is not a colony. And I'm not even only talking about the fact that there have been Jews in Israel for as long as there was Judaism. Because frankly, this part of the world has always been essential to our identity. That's not what I'm talking about. But what is really important for me to talk about is that Israelis today, 50% have European origin. 50% about it. The other part of Jewish Israelis, they come from all over the Middle East, they come from North Africa, they come from Yemen. The Israelis that you see on TV wouldn't pass as white in the US. They'd be brown people. So, knowing this, knowing that the people who are now making a huge part of Israel's citizens, they're not Europeans, they're Arab. They're Jewish Arabs. I really think it is really important to keep this in mind. It explains, or it maybe makes easier, a lot of difficulties. Israel doesn't operate like England. Israel has a very different culture and cultural backdrop. Israel is a mix between Syria and France. It is a very different political climate. A lot of people who came to Israel from Russia, from other countries of the former Soviet Union, and from Morocco, Iran, Iraq, Syria, they didn't come from perfectly peaceful Western affluent democracies where capitalism was a given thing. They have a very different political background. And I think this is really important to understand. Words like colonialism don't mean a thing. They don't mean a thing. But other things that mattered much less to Western countries, at least since World War II, protection, safety, income, are fought for much more aggressively and openly than we would do that in our societies. So, no. No, the answer is no. And I hope we can get back to that. Right now, I don't know what to say. I think it's time. At least it's the time that Nadine said I should, Pastor Nadine said I should go for, and then maybe if we go over for a little bit, we could. So I could take maybe one more question.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, the question is what I think about Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli government. And I really want you to know that this is just my personal opinion, okay? I'm not talking for the Jews, I'm not talking for the state of Israel, I'm also not talking for Congregation Beth Shalom here, right? Or for the Jews in Montana. So I think Bibi Netanyahu is a disgusting prick. And I really think so. I don't think he's a monster. I think he's one of many people who at some point of their lives lost track of maybe past ambitions, and all they were interested in the last years of their lives was to get re-elected, make a lot of money, and not go into prison. Those are perfectly understandable human ambitions, but they really made for very bad politics. And all my friends were out there demonstrating for the last half a year, every Friday, to get rid of these politics and to go back to a government that will put the safety of all of its citizens first, and make sure that Israel has a future. And they were so tired and so angry already on October 6th. And the heartbreak of this situation, well, everyone now is angry at Bibi, which for the first time, everyone is angry at him. Also the people who didn't demonstrate against him before October 7th. Because what he let happen, the fact that now we know that he was warned, the fact that he did not pay attention and didn't want to hear about it, the fact that the army was in a state of absolute unknown for 12 hours while these things happen, live stream on Facebook, are absolutely unexcusable. And I hope one good thing that comes out of this is that Bibi's gonna go. Hopefully to prison, but maybe at least leave the commitment. Okay, so that was just my personal opinion. But the biggest heartbreak about this is that the people who were out there demonstrating for half a year now, every Friday against Bibi, those are the people who are now getting drafted and volunteering and bombing Gaza. And this is the true heartbreak. They didn't want this, but they're the people who actually go to the army. A lot of people who voted for Bibi don't go. They now drive and they volunteer, and that is really sweet of them. But the big, big death tolls in Israeli society came from the people who worked hardest to change Israel as a country in the last years. The kibbutzim around, the kibbutzes around Gaza are amongst the politically most left-wing kibbutzes in Israel. There were so many Israelis who invested into the economy in Gaza. There were Israeli company owners who gave visas to Gazans to come in. There are Gazan harvest helpers who were outside of Gaza when this attack happened, warning the Israeli citizens that the terrorists are coming and that they shouldn't come, or if they were outside of the kibbutz, that they shouldn't go because they're terrorists in the kibbutz. This is not, it shouldn't be a war between people. This is a war between absolutely atrocious political ideologies on both sides. And the people are dying in awful ways because of them. I'm not here to defend the Israeli government. I'm trying to explain to you a little bit of how it right now feels to live in Israel, the lack of perspective, the despair. My friends are crying. No one is happy the way it is now. And, you know the politics of the last years, like every year there were at least one attempt to get rid of Bibi. And it's really hard. And a lot of us with very sweet Western ideas in our heads, we have to maybe accept that Israel is not going to be the country we wanted it to be. I don't know. I'm sitting with a lot of sadness for this. I lived in Israel, I already told you many years. I have citizenship. I never voted there again after I left because that's my personal standpoint. You should vote in a country where you actually don't live and live with the consequences of your vote. So I'm working very hard to be able to vote in this one, where I spent the last 8 years of my life. But when I was there, I would have never voted for Bibi. None of my friends did. But there are enough people there who do. And that is democracy. It's like here, sometimes not the person you want gets elected. And then they still make decisions that impact your life. And sometimes that's heartbreaking.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And don't quote me.
I have a question, and that is how, as a congregation of ELCA Lutherans who live in Bozeman, Montana, how can we meaningfully demonstrate or show concern, solidarity, support with our Jewish neighbors? I'll trust that you can answer that one. I'll have to ask Shadmani or Rahul about how do we continue to do that with our Muslim neighbors. How could we do that being who we are in this place?
First of all, don't give us money. Also, don't give us any more flowers. We got enough. I want to say one thing. I remember I asked a friend of mine, what should I do? And he said, just talk. I think one thing that would be really helpful that if you are in any place, be it online or be it in person, in your family or randomly in the supermarket, where you hear that this topic is talked about in somewhat white and black thinking, if you have it in you, bring in nuance. Because this is a lot of things, but it's not a black and white situation. It is really complicated. If you hear a Jewish neighbor, if you have any, saying weird things these days, cut them some slack. Because they really are emotionally in a very heavy place. And if you hear anyone calling anyone else for violent acts, report them to the police. It is really important. I think the Jewish community in Bozeman is somewhat worried about bubbling up of violence in Montana too. There are some little bubbles, but no one seems to be too concerned. I am very worried that any one of us or all of us one day will be blamed and will be targeted for the politics of the government. Really, most of us didn't vote for it all. I am, as far as I know, the only member of my congregation who looks Israeli citizenship. Everyone else is American, and they didn't vote for any of this. And they read the same news as you do. And a lot of my congregants say to me, what do we do? What do we do about the children? What do we do about the children? Why don't they stop? Why don't they stop? And I explain to them the same things that I explain to you. They can't. They really right now, they don't have it in them. So, yes, support is to sometimes cut someone some slack and talk to them kindly instead of aggressively. Support is to bring in nuance. Support is to report to the police anything that seems to potentially threatening anybody's physical safety. Because I don't want to get there, and I hope we all won't here in Bozeman, but it happened in other places already. And I think it made us somewhat realize that this can happen, like fire.
Go ahead.
So I just think that, one thing that we can do is the peace vigil.
Oh, yes. Yep. This afternoon.
At 3 o'clock. Val Webster is in charge of it. It will start at 3, it will end at 3:30, and it will be a way to show unity for the faith traditions in our Valley Park community. So it's at the Lindley Park Pavilion.
3:30, Lindley Park next to the
3
pavilion.
o'clock to 3:30.
3 p.m., never trust my numbers. 3 p.m., close to the pavilion for 30 minutes.
For 30
Yeah.
minutes.
Okay.
And because Valerie's in charge, it will be like exactly 30 minutes.